You can give Bob Pollock a call at 479-1160 or 349-WCCS. That's 349-9227. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Wonderful. I had this thing that came yesterday. It was our Lesser Lumber fall maintenance tips. We do this every Thursday. We have fall maintenance tips. And they were talking about outdoors. And one of the topics about it was the perfect time to divide or move perennials. Let's talk about that. Dividing and moving perennials. Maybe people want to know what a perennial is. That'd be a good place to start.
That would be a good place to start.
Okay, so let's start there.
So that's a plant that's going to live for multiple years, hopefully. Mm-hmm. A lot of our perennials are herbaceous perennials, meaning that the root system will survive for multiple years, but the top dies back every year. Mm-hmm. Here. In other parts of the country, it may not do that. But because of our weather, the tops die back, but the crown of the plant remains alive. Mm-hmm. So we call them herbaceous perennials.
Okay.
So there's a lot of those.
And of course, the other is the annual,
and
which
and
is
most
the
of
other
them,
type.
right? And most of them are flowering plants. Mm-hmm. They'll either flower and get berries or seed heads on them during the growing season.
Okay, so according to what we were reading yesterday, when it comes time to handle or to treat your perennials in the fall, they were talking about mulching, number one. When is the best time? And they recommended after the first hard frost. Yes?
Yes, that can be done. Mm-hmm. Yes. The only caution I have about that is it depends on the year and the weather conditions. If the ground has been really wet, now we're a little drier this year, but if we think about the past several years where we had wet conditions going into the winter, unless all the mulch is gone and you just want to put a light layer on, I would avoid doing that. But right now, based on conditions, you could, if you need to put a light coating of mulch on there because the other mulch is decayed and almost turned back into compost or soil, then you could top dress that lightly.
Don't cover the crown.
Right. We don't want to hide the plant.
Yeah.
We can go around the plant. That will also help the plant with respect to just the colder conditions, freezing, thawing, if we get into those cycles. Then having a mulch there will help temper the temperature change so that we don't tend to get heaving. If the plant is not well established yet and doesn't have if it just came out, if you just planted it this year, it may not have rooted into the soil as strongly as we would like yet, so it's not quite established. And so those plants are more susceptible to heaving when the ground freezes and thaws.
Now talk a little bit, if you would, about dividing them, dividing a perennial.
Yeah, and so it's good to know which perennial you have, the characteristics of that plant. Is it a plant that is able to be divided? Not all plants are divided equally. So if you have a hosta, you can go in and you can chop that thing up into quarters and have 4 separate plants when you only had one to begin with.
It's really hard to kill hosta, isn't it?
It's very difficult. You can even turn them upside down and plant them, and they will find a way to survive.
Really?
Yeah. They're pretty tough.
That's beautiful. And they're pretty plants. I like them.
The only reason I really know that is I've tried that.
Oh, yeah. By accident?
No, I kind of did it on purpose.
Because you read it somewhere.
Well, sometimes you get frustrated with wildlife, and deer come to hosta, a lot of species of hosta, pretty readily.
Yeah.
They may not have been in your yard before, but if there's hosta there, you have now invited them for dinner and breakfast and lunch.
They love that stuff.
They do. So after a while, you can say, okay, this isn't going to work. We need to switch species.
So you've got this beautiful perennial growing there, and you decide you're going to divide it. And the reason you decide that is because?
Well, as those age, they will grow. Now, some, like the ornamental grasses, they tend to get like a donut after a while. So you had this original clump that you planted, and as that ages and grows, the center of that will die out, and so you essentially have a donut. Okay. The plant becomes a donut with a hole in the center dead area, and so over time that keeps expanding, and so that's a good reason it gets overgrown, essentially. So then you go in, chop it up. It may outgrow its space as well, depending on the other plants you have there or where it's planted or structures, all that. So those may define when you need to divide that, but a lot of times it's just the plant becomes overgrown or it spreads. Some will spread, some you'll have the main plant there, it'll go to seed, the seeds will germinate, and so you'll have multiple plants there in a clump of plants. So you may go in and go back and sort that out, dig them up, and then just replant that more like it was originally.
Yeah. Okay. One of the other suggestions on yesterday's thing was about trees, taking a look up in the trees. Before the leaves turn and fall off, now is the time to identify the dead branches you want to get out of there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
it's a lot easier, as long as it's not too dense, it's a lot easier to see, oh, this branch doesn't have any leaves on it. And now, that doesn't mean it's dead. And a perfect example of that, and we had a number of calls in the last several weeks, my apple tree has lost all its leaves, or most of them.
Therefore, it's dead. But no, that's not true.
And in most cases, it is not true. The tree is still alive. It just lost its leaves early. And several reasons that can happen. One is stress. So that could have been brought on because we had the early part of the growing season was very moist. And then we got into August, and it was still very warm. Yeah. But we kind of shut the faucet off. And so that could have been enough of a change there that those plants felt that and decided they didn't need as many leaves, and they dropped some of those leaves. Okay. Just from stress. And in addition to that, some of those leaves could have had apple scab and some other issues. Leaf spot and apple scab and mite damage and aphid damage, that those leaves were already affected, and so it was easier for them to drop.
And don't blame the cicadas, because the cicadas had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, you would have seen that earlier, and that would have been a flagging of those tips of the, maybe the end of the foot, the end of the branch. They just all turned brown, like they were scorched.
I saw that, as a matter of fact, when the cicadas were here. Driving on 422 on the other side of Katanning, that whole hillside was like that. It was right after you had described it, and you could see these trees that were so affected by it that the tips of the branches were all brown.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of oaks, maples. They liked those trees. Yeah. Laid a lot of eggs in those trees. 17 years from now, we'll revisit that.
We'll learn just how much they like them.
Yeah, so in most cases, those apple trees, and losing the leaves does stress them, although here we are in October. At this point of the year, they're not far from dropping anyhow. So to just double-check yourself and look at your tree, look at the buds. The buds for next year should already be formed on the tips of those branches. So you want to make sure that those are viable and alive. The wood itself, you should be able to take your either a knife or your fingernail, and on this year's growth, scrape that a little bit. Is it green under there? Is it lighter? You get down and you'll be a little layer of green and then a creamy color. If it's rigid, snaps, and is brown, then it's dead.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, we have a caller. Let's see what's going on. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Bob.
Good morning.
I have a question about amaryllis. I had a couple bulbs that bloomed real nice around Christmas time, and then they kind of died off, and I put them in the basement where it was dark. And then I brought them back up. They started getting new growth on them, so I brought them back out. They've been outside all summer. And I just put them back in the basement about a week ago, and I went down, and they're all brown. So I broke that all off. What should I do with these bulbs? Can I force them to, again, this Christmas?
Yeah, you should. Yes, you should be able to force those again. They were out all summer. You just brought them in.
I just brought them in about a week ago, and then Where they very quickly died off the whole top of them. They were tall. I mean, the leaves came up, the stems of them came up, they were full size, and then I put them down the basement. So when do I bring them up? What do I do with them?
Well, I'm thinking it might have been nice if we kept that foliage on them that grew over the summer, but you may be able to cut that off, and really you may need to give them a little cold period before they'll restart to grow again. That they need that chilling period, and then you can bring them out. And oftentimes, if you do that, if you have a cold basement or even a refrigerator, and put them in there for 4 to 6 weeks, and I need to double check how long that needs to be, then you can bring them out and get them growing again. And then hopefully,
in retrospect, like next year, should I, when they get that new growth on them in the summertime, should I just leave that there and then they'll bloom?
Yeah, I'm thinking if we keep that on now, right, and then just bring them in, and then we can keep them going, and then give them the right temperature and light conditions, and then that'll then force them to bloom then in January, February.
Okay.
And I can double check it. If you want to call the office, I can double check that regime to make sure we're right on that. And I can
all right.
give it to you over the phone, or I can send you a sheet that will have that information on.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
That was a great song by George Strait, Amaryllis by Morning. I had to.
You had to. You couldn't resist.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160, 101.1 FM.